Well, there we go. I think we're live. I know we have people joining from all over the world today. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and a very, very warm welcome to this webinar co-hosted with Janet Mertens from the Josh Bersin Company. I'm Jim Sykes and I lead here at AMS. For those of you that don't know AMS, we do two things, and I like to think we do them incredibly well. We provide talent acquisition solutions and talent advisory services. We support around 200 clients in more than 90 countries around the world. And last year, for our enterprise clients alone, we hired in the region of 200,000 experienced staff. By the way, it's in addition to about 25,000 early career hires and about 15,000 contingent worker placements. As you can imagine, the scale of that activity gives us some pretty unique insight into the hiring markets around the world. And we've shared a lot of that insight with Janet and the Josh Bersin team. It has been a quite remarkable few years for those of us working in talent acquisition. Without doubt, the most remarkable few years of my 25-year career. We have navigated the COVID epidemic, the dramatic reductions in hiring that understandably took place, and the corresponding furloughs and layoffs. We then navigated the rebound and the subsequent great resignation, which led to unprecedented hiring volumes across most sectors and geographies. Appearing, I'm sure I don't need to remind you, talent acquisition professionals were more in demand than software engineers, and I can't believe we're going to see that situation happening again anytime soon. We're now navigating a period that feels somewhat uncertain. We're seeing hiring reductions in some sectors, we've seen layoffs in some, we're seeing relative stability in some sectors and markets, but above all, we're certainly seeing employers that are struggling to forecast their likely hiring demand for the year ahead. At AMS, we're referring to these changes within the market as the talent climate. We are delighted to be working with Janet and the Josh Bersin Company on an exclusive series of data-driven reports that will help explore the continuing changes that we see in the talent climate and the impact of those changes on companies and on talent leaders. The first of those reports will be published very soon and will include comprehensive benchmarking data and trends, specifically for the first report related to time to hire. We're really confident that it's going to be a must read for any leaders looking to make sense of their own TA performance metrics. In advance of that report, I'm delighted to have with me now Janet from the Josh Bersin Company and three very special guests, distinguished global talent leaders, all of whom will help us today get a perspective on what's happening in the market. We have Shilpa Shah from Standard Chartered Bank, Beatrice Rodriguez from Bayer, and Martin Vergara from Morgan Stanley. Now, before we go any further, somewhere on your screen, I'm not entirely where, but somewhere on your screen, you should have access to a Q&A box. Please do share with us any questions that you have for Janet or for myself or for our panelists. If we have time, we'll try our best to cover as many questions as we possibly can. Shilpa, Beatrice and Martin are going to join us shortly, but let me hand over first to Janet for her perspective on the talent climate today. Janet, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim. Hello, everyone. As Jim said, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you may be in the world. Thank you for joining us today. I'm delighted to be here with Jim and Beatrice, Martin, and Shilpa to really dig into what's going on and what we think the year ahead is going to look like in the coming years for talent acquisition and talent overall. I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes up front kind of sparking our conversation today with some of what we're seeing in the market, in the data, some of the stories that we are hearing. At the Josh Bersin Company, we've been, studying talent acquisition in an ongoing way for years. Really, Josh has been looking at this topic for a couple of decades, really, and we've been tracking a lot of uncertainty, as Jim mentioned. So, just wanted to take you through some high-level findings that we are seeing that will kind of be the launch pad for our conversation today. And the first thing I will start with is, in our research and in our ongoing conversations with talent leaders and HR leaders around the world is, boy, this is an exciting time. This is an uncertain time. It is rapidly changing, and the disruptions sort of keep on coming. And it's really not just about the last 2 or 3 years. It's really been sort of a decade of nonstop disruption. And then, of course, that was accelerated over the past couple of years with the global pandemic, social unrest, the emerging and explosive technologies that have come through, AI certainly in the last little while. So companies are really grappling with, how do we find the best talent, keep the best talent, unlock and innovate with the best talent in our organization. And so as we kind of dug into this topic and really studied what are the things that are making a difference, we were looking at a couple of, maybe you could call them conflicting signals in the market. Jim, you mentioned a little bit around, time to hire, volume of hiring. And I'll start with volumes. Volume of hiring has had its ups and downs as it often does, but certainly the change is rapid right now. We are seeing volumes going up in markets. We are seeing volumes dropping off. The uncertainty around hiring needs has been very volatile. And then that is sort of compounded by the time to hire trends. So in the market and, with the AMS, I think we've got, we're looking at 500,000 data points. We see time to hire continuing to rise rather than decline. In all sectors across roles, it is increasingly difficult to find talent quickly and get them, onboarded and in and productive. We're also seeing, and Jim mentioned that conflict, we're also seeing a lot of maybe surprising trends around internal mobility. So in our research at Bersin, we know that internal mobility is not only important to organizations, but also important to employees and candidates. And unfortunately, what we're starting to see in the data right now is that the thrust or the momentum for that internal mobility and movement that we saw a couple of years ago has really slowed. And organizations tell us all the time, I have conversations regularly with heads of TA, heads of talent, who are saying, there are a lot of barriers to mobility, and we just can't keep that momentum. So we're going to dig into that today and hear some of the strategies that are working well. I also want us to talk about, and I know Martin and Shilpa and Beatrice are going to share some stories around brand. One of the big themes that we're seeing in organizations this year is really around, reinventing, rethinking the employee value proposition and the employer brand. Gone are the days of that sort of, slick employee careers website, which wasn't, aligned to the corporate brand. We are hearing more and more from candidates, from organizations, that your corporate brand really is your employer brand. And so what are the strategies? We're going to dig into this today. What are the strategies that companies are using and implementing with great success to rethink their brand, to redefine it, to really be, sort of employee and candidate centric in thinking about their employee value proposition? And then, of course, we can't have a conversation about talent without thinking about skills. The skills-centric organization continues to be a path forward for companies, but a tricky one to navigate. So what are companies doing around having visibility to the skills that you have in-house? How are you tapping into those skills? What are companies doing to hire for skills and look at non-traditional hiring pools to get at that, to unlock sort of new pools of skills and capabilities to bring inside? And to Jim's point, as we look at the trends and the data that we're seeing and put together this benchmarking report, which will be available for all of you this spring, we really want to do a bit of a spotlight on tech talent, specifically digital tech talent, and how are companies who haven't before had to look for that kind of talent, how are they going about doing that? What are the, the success factors to consider? I think at that, with that in mind, we've got a lot to cover. I'd love to call Beatrice, Martin, and Shilpa on as well. We've got lots of questions and conversation to have together. I see we've got Beatrice and Martin. Shilpa has joined us too. Wonderful.
Fantastic. Thank you all. And Janet, thank you so much for the let me take the opportunity to remind our audience that there was a Q&A functionality somewhere on the screen. Please do feel free to share your questions, and we'll try our hardest to get through them. In the meantime, we've spoken a bit about some of the trends in the market, and Beatrice, Martin, Shilpa, you'll have heard me say that certainly from an AMS perspective, we're seeing significant reductions in some sectors. Obviously, we've seen layoffs in some. We're seeing a level of stability across some sectors. We're seeing pockets of growth, but it seems to be a really difficult market to predict right now. I'd love to get your sense on the market that you're seeing within your own organizations. And perhaps, Beatrice, perhaps you'd like to go first.
Thanks very much. Yes, indeed, I think it continues to be a challenge. However, I see a little bit of a difference from a couple of years ago, or probably the last 18 months to today. I think whereas 18 months we were reactive, and it was a bit more volume driven, reactive volume. We didn't know what we didn't know. Our skills and strategies still were probably not operationalized fully. When you look at today is probably a bit more focused. It is more related to our skills game plan internally, if you have one, or especially the areas where we've started. And I think that is also driven by how we're managing our cost. Our cost positions today and what we know about our cost structures today is also really different from 18 months years ago. So yes, definitely still you see the role of the recruiter being, probably more advertised than software engineers and so others. However, I do think there is a little bit more specific, more business linked with priorities and targeted to be part of our strategy. So that's what I could say. It's my insight today.
Beatrice, thank you. And Shilpa, Martin, you're in a pretty different sector. Shilpa, perhaps you'd like to go next. What are you experiencing right now in terms of the market and the trends?
Yeah, look, I think I agree with everything that Beatrice said, and it's all about skills, but the skills you need now, and it's hot skills, right? It's about both the technical side, but also the human skills as well. That's being a big focus, and I think it's looking at how you carve out those critical skills areas and differentiate the way you go about attracting those. And I think that's going to be really important. How do you go about attracting different talent segments? What approach do you need to use to bring them in? And then also, how do you keep them and retain them? So I think it's that talent ecosystem that's in play here. And I think the role of the recruiter is becoming even more important now as more of a strategic enabler across that talent ecosystem. So I think there's a real shift of what we're seeing with that role in itself as well.
And I love the idea of the talent ecosystem. And I'm sure we're going to come back to that soon, because Janet, that's something I know you and Josh are particularly passionate about at the moment.
Absolutely.
Martin, what about you? What's your perspective of the market today?
I agree with my colleagues here. Careful and considered hiring. Even though volumes have come down right across the board, it's interesting that there are still pockets of scarcity in certain areas, like technology, for example. So still being very deliberate and focused, and making sure, linking back to Janet's answer on brand, right, and how we're selling our brand, and framing ourselves in these conversations is super critical.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I'd love to get your perspective. I would suggest that one of the reasons we've had the huge hiring volumes that we've had in the last couple of years has been attrition in most organizations has been much higher. And I think kind of one off the back of COVID, clearly there was some kind of pent up movement where people haven't had the opportunity to move and evolve their careers. And then secondly, I think the economic situation, high levels of inflation, the cost of living has probably driven some people to seek a higher salary. And well, the evidence shows it's typically easier to achieve a higher salary if you move externally. Do you think what we're now seeing is just an adjustment back to normal levels of attrition? Are you seeing attrition coming down within your own organizations, or do you think there's some fear about the economy and perhaps people aren't moving because they're worried that we may enter a who might have a view?
I can go if that's helpful. I think there's an element of stabilization. I think there was that pent up, need before, and then no one moved, and then everybody's moving, and the great resignation or the great regret, I think in some cases. But I still think that employees have such choice nowadays. And I think since COVID, it's about what's important to them, what's changed for them that's really going to matter, and what organizations are really putting that proposition forward to really attract the skills and the employees that they want, and going about it in a really fast and purposeful way is still there. So I think people are still moving, but it's a choice they're making that's about their lifestyle, what works for them, and I think that's what we've got to be very careful of, is not just the attraction but the retaining of the talent as well.
Absolutely agree. And Janet, Josh talks about a jobs full recession. I think Josh had said if it's going to be a recession, it's a jobs full recession. What's your perspective?
Yeah, well, and I think there's a couple of things, Shilpa, that you touched on there that we're really tracking. One is, yes, you're right, it's purposeful movement. I mean, for a little while now, candidates have been in the driver's seat, right? They have wanted sort of pay and perks and flexibility and purpose, and and so I really do think organizations that are getting this right are tapping into kind of the voice of the candidate and thinking about how to find those candidates, and to your point, Shilpa, to keep those candidates, right? It's one thing to get them in the door. We're watching some trends, interesting trends around alumni and boomerang, that sort of theme of boomeranging back to a previous employer, where the numbers are really going up in terms of candidates who have left a company and then are returning, within the first 16 months seems to be that sweet spot, kind of coming back in, usually in a higher role, in a different role, especially in the management kind of levels and up. So I do think that organizations are, needing to really watch that retention piece beyond that 1 year mark.
Yeah.
And Jim, to answer your question as well, I do think the pendulum has swung a bit in more of a personal perspective. Attrition is super low at the current moment. I do think normal levels are a bit higher than where we are, and I think that's largely attributable to the overall economy, what the Fed's doing, where rates are, at least here in the States. And so the optionality might not be there as much as it was in the past. But at the same time, I was having dialogue with some colleagues this morning on this topic. Again, looking back to some of Janet's comments earlier, mobility, right? It's a great time for mobility. When companies aren't spending as much, there aren't as many places to go. Working with your own talent base is a great opportunity.
Yeah, 100% agree. And Janet, we'll have at some point soon, we'll have some data that we'll be able to share on internal mobility trends by sector and around the world. But risk of giving the secret away already. The amazing thing that we found looking at the data was that actually as hiring has got tougher and as time to hire has gone up, internal mobility has decreased, which seems incredible, but that's definitely the trend.
And I'd love to hear from our three guests. I will say, one of the things around internal mobility that I hear an awful lot is that it's not a tech problem. It sometimes can be a process challenge, but it really is a cultural challenge to really build that culture of movement and mobility and growth and progression that is not the linear traditional kind of movement through the company is very difficult, both on the kind of the management side. How do you encourage managers to let go of their best talent, right? To think about talent as there for the company, not just there for the team. And then also on the employee side, how do you encourage a safety, if you will, to move, to take on new tasks, to feel comfortable doing stretch roles. So I think there is a cultural component here that is continuing to be a challenge for organizations. I'd love to hear, Martin, Shilpa, Beatrice, what are you doing around internal mobility to help, enable and foster that culture?
Sure. So on the Morgan Stanley front, I'm sorry, Shilpa, you want to go first?
Go, Martin. Yeah.
on the Morgan Stanley front, you know, we work with Eightfold, and so we just launched a career hub, and this will be helpful for us to create that marketplace, if you will, for a more systematic approach for employees to find internal opportunities. I mean, a lot of times, you know, I've only been in my seat since the beginning of the year, right? And so having spent 16 years within a broader business, and you know, some folks, and I think not just at Morgan Stanley, but more broadly, in certain cases, folks think it's easier technologically to find opportunities outside, right? So catching us up to the present day, you know, leveraging a technology like Eightfold will be super helpful, but it doesn't end there, right? And in terms of the go forward view that I have, it's kind of a repeat surround sound to get the organization of 80,000+ people to a point where it's okay to seek internal mobility opportunities, right? From a manager acceptance to, you know, the systems, the processes, technology, like everything included. That's the path we got to go on, right? We have our own journey to take, but that's kind of how we're thinking about it.
I think many companies now, and we are also working with, you know, some of the AI companies, and you've named one, and also creating our talent marketplace, and we are starting your journey to a skills. So we know what we have to do. However, I think for us it's important that we don't think that technology is going to basically solve everything for us. So your culture piece, Janet, is critical, because we could put all of those elements into place, and I think technology is there, but it's not actually 100% just there. So I think the partnership with some of those like AI tech companies that we're working on is super important to co-create the space, because sometimes we don't know what we don't know. However, I think the cultural aspect and incentivizing the internal mobility across the company is probably one that we need to, because you can have all of that tech available, but then questions around governance, questions around, can I actually, now that it's in front of me, can I actually just apply? Do I need to actually ask my manager if I can be removed from my job or not? So I think there is a broader aspect of internal mobility that I think we've probably have, you know, put our binders, because it was just too much to tackle, and we focused externally over the last 2-3 years. Now the fact that externally talent is not available as much as it used to be, I actually think internally our organization is realizing that we probably have to do something internally now. And I think that the cultural aspect of it and seeing the benefit, and the fact that I think the biggest fear that everybody has is, oh, if I move to a completely different division or area of my company, how am I going to be perceived? How is that going to guarantee the success that I'm having today where I am? So I think that it's looking really at this sort of holistic view of how you progress in the organization, and what success looks like when you actually move across versus sort of ticks on the box that you do throughout your career. So that's sort of that's what we're working on, really.
I can get super passionate about this topic, so I'll try and make a very quick point on this. I think all of the above with what my colleagues have just said, but and the culture is really important, because I think you can otherwise very quickly overdevelop and underdeploy, and you need to be careful about that. So that's great that you're a culture of development, but you also need to be a culture of deployment. And one of my previous organizations I worked in, they had a culture of movement, and I think that's what really made the difference. Whether you're a people leader, you're a talent in the organization, whether you're a recruiter, you knew that this is what you did and this is how things work around here. I'm going to go back to the ecosystem again, though. It's really connecting the skills piece, the development piece, and the deployment piece together, so that you really can do it in a more purposeful way. Then it becomes BAU. Technology is an enabler, but it's not the only solution, as everyone just said. So I think there's more to this, and more effort and focus that's required to really make it successful and to do it at scale. So yeah.
maybe Jim, I might share a story that I loved that I heard from our organization. I know we want to move on to some other topics, but I call it the deli counter story, because there's a whole equity piece too to consider when you're thinking about internal mobility and how are you tapping, which talent are you tapping? And organizations often share that they've sort of gone through the same kind of groups of people every time for special projects, for whatever the new roles are. And so there was one organization that shared the deli counter story where, you go to a deli counter, and what they were hearing originally in their organization was very much a sense from the workforce of, why even bother? I'm never going to get an opportunity to do this new role or to stretch my skills, etc. So they implemented the idea that you go to the deli counter, you get a number. You don't have to jostle, or and I'm Canadian. We like our cues, we like our lines, but you get your number, you wait, and then all of the choices are still available to you. You don't have to worry about the that you've lost the best opportunity because you weren't first in line. And so that's how they actually approached their internal mobility. And again, Shilpa, to your point, built this culture of movement where every manager knew that their employees would have their opportunities to build skills, to look at new roles, to look at projects and assignments, to get development for those for those roles, to look at the gaps in their skills that may be adjacent, that may give them adjacent roles to, or adjacent skills rather, to roles that they weren't even expecting. So really kind of approached it from this very strategic, everyone moves around the company approach, and it really made a difference for them.
I love that. I love the idea of the deli counter approach. I'm sure we're going to come back to this topic a little later on, because I think, as each of you were saying, this all feels interconnected, and frankly, to invest the huge amount of effort and strain in talent acquisition that we do, and then not think about how we better retain our existing talent is pretty scandalous. Let's go back to talent acquisition for a second, though, and I've seen a couple of really good questions coming in from the audience. So maybe to help set up a couple of those questions, I wanted to ask a little bit about, or I wanted to perhaps use digital hiring, tech hiring as an example. I'm guessing most of us would agree the hardest segment to hire into right now, and kind of the area of greatest scarcity when it comes to talent, is going to be tech and digital skills. I'm really curious if anyone is different to tap into those tech and digital skills today, whether you're perhaps taking different approaches from a brand perspective, whether you're just investing more in more recruiters, more sources to support that part of the business. Does anyone have a particular view when it comes to tech and digital?
I can start, actually. So we realized that if we want to attract digital talent, we probably have to find an approach to appeal to them beyond sort of what, as a group, we also position ourselves for the rest of the organization. Meaning, would a digital talent basically enter or go through the same career website that a finance talent, or a HR talent, or a operations talent? And we've realized that actually don't. So digital talent is sort of, they're wired in a different way, the way that sort of like look into opportunities. But we are still, I mean, we're still doesn't have the maturity to change completely the ecosystem, so that we can actually put the same way that we would attract a digital talent to attract everybody else in the world, because of our systems, our processes, our technology. So what we've done is actually on creating a sort of a specific entry point to our company with the digital access for that particular digital talent. So the moment that an external candidate is looking at Bayer to have a career in IT, digital, or any other specific, basically the technology is helping them to redirect them to the specific digital ecosystem that we've created for them. Okay, so that is actually helping us to be more visible, appeal to that particular group. It's high in demand. They work faster, they go faster about things, at the same time that we transform the rest of our core business and company. Yeah. So that's one approach. And then we kind of bring everything together through the value end-to-end of our talent acquisition, sourcing, and so on. And we also do pipelining and so on. But I think that one probably is one that we realized earlier on we couldn't wait for the entire
Yes.
them to transform.
Yeah, that's a great example, Beatrice, and it probably leads quite neatly onto the idea of brand and EVP. And I always think it's a fascinating discussion when we talk about digital talent, and when the tech companies at the beginning of this year, and I'm sure everyone will say tech companies typically lay off every year in cycles. So perhaps this round of layoffs had a little bit more media publicity than it often would do. But I'm sure most of us were hearing from the businesses, we need to take advantage of that. We need to grab all of that talent before our competitors grab that talent. And when the digital companies are laying off, everyone wants that talent, whether it's pharma, whether it's retail, whether that's investment banking. We're all trying to tap into the same talent, and brand and EVP, presumably, we would feel are really critical elements of enabling us to articulate to that talent why they should be joining not only our organization but our sector, if we're trying to hire them from the likes of a Meta or a Google. Does anyone have any particular, or any of you trying to do anything differently around EVP and brand, and how perhaps you tailor to different segments of the market?
I can talk a little bit about I can talk a little bit about previous companies. When I was in healthcare, for example, one of the things that worked very well was, people want to do interesting work and they want to have purpose. And so we really tagged onto the purpose piece to say, actually, there's no bigger purpose than being in a healthcare company that's saving lives in moments that matter, etc. I think it's about talking about the work someone will do, whether it's banking, whether it's retail, whether it's tech itself. And I think you can't be the best kept secret anymore. You've really got to talk about why someone should come and work for your organization and what culture and what value system you have. That's what people really align to. So it's really bringing that out in your brand for sure. I think it's also about how you then take them through a process, right? So if you're talking about being a tech company, but then your process is cumbersome, long-winded and difficult, that's not going to leave a great taste in a candidate's mouth. So trying to look at what are you trying to do differently here? What gamification or tech can you bring in to the process so they can see that you are tech-minded and it's not just words on a piece of paper. So I think that process, that experience is just as important as the EVP piece as well.
I completely agree, and I'm reminded of a chat I had with a head of talent acquisition a number of years ago, who was talking about their strategy to hire digital talent, and who had said it had been a really tough change to achieve within their organization, but they had finally agreed that people joining in digital roles could have Apple Macs instead of Dell laptops. And I thought, gosh, if it's going to take a year to get that part of your strategy over the line, actually changing your brand and your EVP is going to be somewhat of a challenge. But it is a really good example of actually the things we need to think about when we're trying to entice talent from other sectors. It's not easy to do.
Actually, Jim, for us, we tried about a year ago to look at it in a bit of with a different lens. So typically you would go about, these are your values, this is what you believe, right? And then you as a candidate or as an individual try to match, understand what is it. And then, by the way, then you will have aside your sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion commitment, right? Something on a side or one of the values, right? And we said, you know what? At the end of the day, your DEI strategy and your values is it not the same? Is it all together? At the end of the day, can you have a value proposition without actually having a fully diverse and inclusive environment? And I think that we sort of start to look at it with a bit more of a user-centric approach, and we come up with this sort of like be Bayer. And it was like, just be you. So this is our brand. Our brand is come and be you. Come and work for us and be you, and then be Bayer. And you is as big as you could be right now. Of course, then you've got the unwritten rules and how the company operates, our leadership integrity. Fundamentally, be you. And that is where we sort of look at it as like, be you, whoever you are, in all dimensions, and bring yourself in. And I think that actually became very, very quickly adopted as a sort of like, this is sort of what we believe in, is that we believe that you come and you are yourself, and this is our brand, and this is a place that, no matter who you are, and you can be successful, and you are part of the company. And I think that is a little bit of that integrating brand EVP with also diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the intersectionality of everything.
Beatrice, I want to chime in on that, because I've heard that story from your team, and it really does resonate. And I think, we started to hear a little bit of that too from some of the sort of our North Star companies like Bayer, who have really turned flip the coin, right? It's no longer about the company first, and then you come and do your best work for us. It's about bringing yourself to the company, and I think that's a really important shift for organizations. As you think about brand, it's really about putting that employee in the front, right? It's about what the talent brings. The other thing I wanted to say too is, and your team shared with me the phrase, we realized we couldn't rest on our laurels. So for a long time, for a company like Bayer, you have been who you are. You have that brand, you're well known, but not resting on your laurels was sort of an aha moment, I think, for the organization to realize that if you want to bring in new types of talent, non-traditional talent, look for new capabilities and skills in candidates, it really was about recognizing that you had to do something different. And I think, there's a story IKEA shared with us around trying to attract digital and tech talent, and they went through a whole campaign of bringing in and inviting candidates to come in and 3D print their meatballs. So they actually created a whole campaign around 3D printed meatballs to say, we are not just the IKEA you used to know, but we are an organization that is looking to kind of break the boundaries and move forward and sort of push the envelope. So I do think it is about rethinking the experience for tech talent candidates.
Definitely.
From a Morgan Stanley standpoint, it's interesting because there's a lot of similarities here where over our past 3 firm-wide marketing campaigns, our employees have been at the center of them. I remember back, I was actually marketing 6 or 7 years ago, and at the time it was capital creates change. We always link it back to the employees. So it's capital creates change. What change will you create? And then we feature an employee in the middle of that advertisement. Our most recent one was, we are Morgan Stanley. And within those communications, it's I am Martin Vergara, here's my story, and then we are Morgan Stanley. And so the common thread, I think, with all of our employee value prop broader marketing campaigns is our smarts and how we delve in complexities. And our employees are always at the center of that. And our newest one is old school ideas. Old school grit, new world ideas, right? And so we're gonna do the same thing and connect our current employees to that. But the brand is super important because hopefully folks know that our brand is our smarts and our employees are our asset. And similar to Notre Dame, I have to talk about Notre Dame, the interlocking ND. Some of you might wonder why it's behind me. I'm actually here on campus today for an event today and tomorrow, which I do have to pitch. If you have any TA leads out there, Notre Dame's a great place to take a look at. But again, similar brand, right? If you want to be a great student and athlete, both, Notre Dame's a great place to be. So couldn't be more important, I guess, on all fronts as a team outlined.
There's a question I want to come to briefly. We have lots of questions, by the way. So the first question that I wanted to come to, the question is the views of skills flexibility feel incredibly important. An example would be the recent trend of individuals with no background in tech now embracing training to become DevOps engineers. And the question is, do you believe that's a sustainable solution? And I guess, Janet, that may be a good question for you. Presumably, with the talent shortages that we have, particularly in tech and digital, we need these types of solutions because demand exceeds supply, and there's no silver bullet to suddenly magicking an extra 1 million digital talent.
Yeah, well, and I think it's it's kind of a nice connection with everything we've been talking around career pathways and growth opportunities and adjacent skills. One of the things that companies are realizing as they get into much more of an internal mobility focus is that they are sitting on some fantastic talent and skills that they may not even realize. And I do think that upskilling and reskilling talent and looking at skills adjacencies inside your organization can be a pathway to build that. Digital skills rather, have a very short half-life now, right? I mean, we're talking 2-3 years before those skills become obsolete, or half the skills that your digital talent have now become obsolete. We just did a huge study in the banking sector. Martin, I know you know about this one, and Shilpa too, that looked at the different types of skills in sort of our leading pace setter banks versus their peers who are lagging. And it really was around building that transformation in digital talent inside the organization and building those capabilities to not only have the specific skills of today, the digital skills of today, but the ability to grow and develop and transform to the new skills of tomorrow. And I think that's a big piece of this. Would love to hear from Martin, Shilpa, and Beatrice what you're doing to build those career pathways for digital talent inside your organizations.
Yeah, I would say at a high level, our technology organization and related partners we've created over the years a number of key partnerships with other organizations around how to develop cohort training development programs to bring in folks in with the right skill sets and then deploy them smartly within areas of our technology organization. We're actually looking at how we get more and more organized, because there's a lot of organizations out there, a lot of partnerships out there. So how do we do that smartly across regions, across the tech verticals, and continue to make the right bets with those partnerships is kind of where we're thinking. But
Martin, can I ask a follow-on to that? Are you doing things with academic institutions? I know some organizations, and certainly in finance, I've seen some digital talent hubs working directly with, and I know in Canada we had a hub where we had finance, both banking and insurance companies working together to build certification programs and work directly with academic institutions. Are you doing anything around that at Morgan Stanley today?
Yes, we are. So yeah, it's both from academic institutions and other related partnerships. And again, I think part of it is there's probably, when you take both those combined, it's probably upwards of 50+ related, partnerships, whether it be academic institutions or otherwise. So just getting more organized there and continuing to think about how we do that effectively is what we're thinking about.
Yeah, we're doing quite a bit of reskilling, upskilling. The learning, function is focusing on that. We're looking at both the tech and the human skills as well. And again, just working through what can we attract externally, what do we build internally, even starting from early careers. What do we bring in from a early careers angle, as well as then looking at the proposition slightly differently for lateral hiring and then exec as well. So yeah, there's quite a bit of work going on there.
Even in Janet, within AMS, we now have a skilling proposition for tech talent.
That's right.
We've recognized that be the best partner to our clients that we can be, we can't rely on just being able to go and find talent in the marketplace with the skills when there is such a deficit of the skills required. So we're supporting our clients to find raw talent and upskill them and reskill them with the skills that our clients need. And without a doubt, that is going to be a continuing trend. The demand for tech talent and AI talent, I guess, is a great example of that, is only going to increase. And maybe we come back to AI in a second, because there are a few questions in the chat, and I know at the moment it's a particularly hot topic. I'm not sure if anyone's going to particularly want to talk to AI, but we should touch upon it. But maybe before we do, there were a couple of questions related to diversity, inclusion, equity, and it's always such an important question. I wonder if people feel that we're putting the same emphasis on DE&I today as perhaps we were a year ago or 2 years ago. I'd love to get your perspectives on perhaps how you see our focus on DE&I needing to evolve, particularly in line. We've talked a bit about EVP and a bit about brand.
I kind of start with that because that's probably one of our key focus at Bayer. So the reason why I'm saying this is because typically we come from 2 or 3 years where DEI has been a bit of a separate program, separate initiative, separate ability framework, separate everything. And then when you look at really the performance of organizations that have been working over the last 3 to 4 years on DEI, how we actually move the needle. And reality is that when you dig deeper, there's still a high dependency on the HR person that really goes and sort of poke the leader saying, and have you hired enough women? Have you hired enough diversity? And I think that we just simply cannot cope with that in today's environment and in the future, especially with transition to a skill-based organization. So what we are focusing now is really embedding DEI into talent management, really, from the get-go, where it is not dependent on individuals and is technology enabled. So we're looking at the entire value chain of our organization, from a talent management, talent acquisition, and really what are the points where DEI needs to be embedded, and it cannot be a task of either a recruiter or an HR individual to drive it. So when you think about sourcing, when you think about hiring, when you think about slates of short list of diversity candidates, when you think about succession planning, all of that needs to be embedded and needs to be part of the day-to-day operating mechanism of leaders through a self-service leader-led approach. And that is where technology is coming to us. So embedding DEI into talent management and doing it sustainably is really one of the key advancements that I think would help us de-bias our processes. For example, why we need years of service in our job postings. Why do we need to specify that we need a full-time employee or a part-time employee? So all of these are there unconsciously from many, many years, and we just need to simply bring the equity part of the equation into our talent management processes and break through those systematic barriers that are sort of hindering us. So that's what we are doing, really a lot of focus on making sure that all of this is operationalized.
Yeah, and Beatrice, the beauty of that approach, of course, is that we open up talent pools and segments of the market for hiring that may not have been open to us previously if our strategy was purely to hire job-ready talent who were already doing this job today. Martin, Shilpa, I'm sure both of you have perspectives.
Yeah, Jim, it's very similar to Bayer. At Morgan Stanley, we've also combined D&I, talent development, and TA into one organization under talent. I won't repeat what she said, but those synergies really do matter. Again, if you link it back to what we discussed earlier around mobility, it's not just a TA function, right? You need the talent development team at the table. You need the D&I team at the table. So it's a total team effort when it comes to these things versus, sometimes we can become siloed in big organizations. So, and yeah, listen, I think more broadly, there's still work to do within, obviously, the D&I space more broadly. Like the gaps within our organizations are still very real. But at the same time, the E, equity, is very important too. And the letter to continue to emphasize, because things should be equitable across the board versus, again, having a pendulum swing in one way or the other. But yeah, I think the combination of the talent organizations will really start to bear fruit in the coming weeks and months for us, because there's some really good work that we're going to have ahead of us.
Yeah, sure. It certainly feels to me like we've moved from a couple of years ago where we were looking at lots of kind of tactical interventions, such as making sure that everyone is trained, looking at the proportion of diverse candidates on slates and the conversion rates. It certainly feels that all of you as talent leaders are now thinking much more holistically about your overarching strategies for DE&I within the organization as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one of the things that we've really worked on is making sure that this is everyone's agenda. It's the business-led imperative that flows through every single part of your talent ecosystem. I think I've said that word too many times today. But it's got to happen exactly to Beatrice's point and Martin's point, which is you could recruit a ton of talent into the organization, but if it's not the right culture, or we don't think about belonging, or we're not understanding the root causes of why someone's leaving, then you're going to have that revolving door. So it's looking at everything very holistically and saying, okay, how do we do this at a business level, understand why this is an imperative, and really focus, where it matters, how you do it differently for different talent segments. We just did a spring insight week over the past couple of weeks where we brought ethnically diverse talent to our organization with a view that we want to really convert them into interns, and then with a view to having them convert into graduates or into permanent roles. So it's starting earlier on in your process as well, and bringing that talent pool through to the organization at an earlier stage. So lots going on. I think it's never been more important, actually. So I think it's something that is just has to be part of your DNA and your culture, and people need to feel that. So again, it goes back to EVP, making sure we're really explaining what we do and how we do it, and why it's a great place to work for all talent. It's going to be very important.
Thank you, Shilpa. There's a question from the audience specifically to Beatrice. Can you share some examples of successful initiatives that you've implemented at Bayer, and how have they contributed to the overall success of the company? And a second question, which maybe is a better one to pick up on, what advice would you give to other companies that are looking to improve their D&I efforts? I guess, Beatrice, a great way of framing that question might be kind of given the sense that talent acquisition leaders in particular perhaps instinctively look at those kind of tactical interventions. What advice would you give to a TA leader as to how they can really enhance D&I?
Yeah, so I think for me, and we're not there yet, but we've started this journey probably 16 months ago, where we actually talking about systematic barriers and how do we break through. So we actually, in our HR transformation, we design an HR operating model that includes total talent solutions. So we basically we put under one organization, which is the organization that I came to Bayer to lead, everything related talent, end to end. So this question of really looking at the value chain of talent, whereas as HR professionals, we sort of look at, in the past, we come from looking at talent acquisition, and then we do learning, and then we do succession planning, and then we do skills. So not only, I think that creating and breaking the silos within HR, and sort of more and more I see myself connecting my talent acquisition team with my learning and development team. That is really where it's making us going into the next level. And my talent acquisition team with my skills organization within the umbrella, which is basically how we're calling it, is our integrated talent experience, because we're putting as well then technology through it. So an advice to a talent acquisition leader is you really need to be in the value chain connected with the rest of the HR peers and colleagues and organizations to be able to be effective and sustainably in what you're doing. So I know that sometimes, well, that doesn't depend on me. It depends if our HR organization transform. Yes, but I think that this is, if I have to leave you with really one takeaway, is as an HR, we really need to get out of our way. To be honest with you, we need to look at our own organization, what we have been hindering ourselves simply because we've been siloed within HR, and how do we really put ourselves and design our organizations in a way that it speaks the end-to-end and the value, and then how you really operationalize that with the lenses of through the user and the value, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think that diversity, equity, and inclusion is the common theme across talent, and then you build the different sort of skills and games around it, so that you can go to a talent marketplace and so on. So that's probably, Jim, what I would answer the colleague that was interested.
That's Beatrice, that's awesome. And I feel we finally got to this topic of systemic talent and systemic HR that Janice, I know that you're really focused on with the Bersin company.
Yes, that's right. And Beatrice, I love that, that story about how you really think about this in an integrated way. And that's really what we're studying now. And this year is sort of a primary area of focus for us at Bersin, which is really to understand, we call it systemic HR. And we are seeing examples cropping up everywhere from organizations who over the past few years have, whether it was diversity, equity, and inclusion that drove it, or well-being, health and well-being may have driven it, pay equity, various kind of examples. And then of course the skills conversation, where companies have, the HR organizations really have had to drop the silos and make connections. The big connect, as you put it, Beatrice, is really between TA and learning and development, and understanding, as you think about hiring for skills, what are the skills that you need and how do you have visibility to that? And so we're doing a massive study right now on not just, we call it the 4R model, right? So recruit, retain, reskill, and redesign. And how do all four of those kind of work together? And what are how do you pull those levers, and what are the impacts when you look at any one of those? But then really, what is the operating system that you need to put in place, to your point, Beatrice, that allows you to be quite intentional in those connections? So we've had great examples over the past couple of years through necessity of making those connections. But now, how do organizations really rethink the operating model of HR into a system, into a systemic kind of approach to allow for those connections to happen much more deliberately, much more intentionally?
We are almost at time, and that feels like a really good topic to end our discussion today. We didn't get to AI. I'm sure all of our panelists will be disappointed to not talk to AI, but perhaps we can run a further session. Janet, before I close, any final comments from you?
But, I think the big theme here is experimentation and boldness, right? I think what we're seeing in organizations, and AI, we can save that for the next webinar for sure. But I think what I really heard today, and I think what all of us have kind of talked about, is moving forward in TA and HR with a kind of being unafraid to experiment, being unafraid to rethink and reinvent here. I think we're at a very important point, or sort of turning point for HR. And I think these organizations, Beatrice, Shilpa, and Martin, thank you for sharing the stories of how you are really boldly experimenting and being creative and putting your employees and your candidates first. So that's my takeaway from today.
Janet, 100% agree. And I think the challenges that all of us as talent leaders are going to face with acquiring the digital talent that our businesses so desperately need are going to force us to take new approaches and be innovative, and to think about how we don't just acquire job-ready talent, but we acquire the potential that we need in the marketplace, the diverse talent that we need in the marketplace, and are going to force us to think about integrated approaches to talent. And I think that's hugely exciting for all of us. So huge thank you, Janet, to you for joining me and hosting this webinar, and to each of our panelists, Shilpa, Beatrice, and Martin. I know that everyone joining will have gained huge value from all of your insights. Thank you so much for joining. We're really, really grateful. And to our audience, as soon as this webinar finishes, you will see a very short survey, I'm told, pop up on your screens. We would love to receive your feedback. Thank you. And in the meantime, just a reminder, this is the first webinar in our Talent Climate series. There is much more to come, including the first of our Talent Climate reports, as we mentioned earlier. Having registered for this session, you'll now automatically receive email notifications for future webinars, but also to receive those Talent Climate reports. So we look forward very much to engaging with you all soon. And in the meantime, thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to Janet, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you.